This is absolutely a pitch, but it's Lippman's pitch of the day, so I've got to give it, and I enjoy it. How many of you know Stephen Jay Gould? Okay, anybody know Stephen? Well, Stephen Jay Gould was a great scientist and a great evolutionary biologist. What he did was he developed the theory of punctuated equilibrium, which is to say that evolution doesn't occur linearly, but it occurs with periods of stability that are punctuated by dramatic events, like a meteor falling in Mexico that ends the age of the dinosaurs. And that was really his theory. But what also distinguished him was he was a truly great writer. The last time I saw him was in the other building, and he was here at a seminar that was talking about why science writing shouldn't be boring. It should be interesting to everybody. And he wrote columns for Nature magazine that no matter what the topic was, you couldn't stop reading them. They were so well written. Well, I read a book of his recently called Full House. It's about 20 years old. And like most scientists, he was interested in other things as well. And so 1/3 of this book that's about evolutionary biology really is devoted to baseball. And in particular, it's devoted to answering the question as to why there are no 400 hitters in baseball. The World Series is going on now. I don't know how much anyone here knows about baseball. Some of you may know a lot. Some of you may view it as an unfamiliar American kind of waste of time. But in order to understand what I'm about to say, there's only 2.5 things you need to know about baseball. And one is that baseball exists for the maintenance of statistics about baseball, okay? The action on the field is almost irrelevant. Usually the announcers will say, oh, no one has made that play on a sunny Tuesday with no clouds in the sky since 1938 or something. It's all statistics. So the only thing you need to know is baseball is all about statistics. Okay, the second thing you need to know is that the rules of baseball have been substantially constant for 100 years, so there's lots of statistics. And Gould analyzed those statistics with the particular question of why there were no more 400 hitters. The last 400, and that 400, that's the half thing you need to know. That's the batting average. That means 40% of the time that you come up to play, you're actually going to get a hit. That's all you need to know about baseball. So he spent a third of this book analyzing why the last 400 hitter in baseball was in 1941. And that turned out to be Ted Williams, a famous guy from Boston, so Bostonians will know it. The closest anyone had come after that was 15 years later, someone almost hit 400. Ironically enough, that was also Ted Williams. Okay, then there was someone else who came close in the mid-'80s, but no one's done it since. So for the first 40 years of baseball, there were lots of them. Roger Hornsby, all kinds of people. Afterwards, there were none, and the question is why? And he goes on and answers this question, or thinks about it. Now, one of the things you might think is the answer, and I'm going to be real brief about this, because it's a 7-minute pitch, but I'm kind of going to compress it. Okay, is like, oh, the pitchers are better and the hitters are terrible. Well, that's totally not true. It turns out in the early days of baseball, the hitters were little guys. They weren't these big thugs like we have today. So that's not true. So he looks at all the possible reasons, like maybe management styles have changed or whatever. And the conclusion that he comes to is that the reason there aren't any more 400 hitters is because everyone who's involved in the sport has gotten very good. Now, what does that mean? What that means is if you look at the chart that I've put up there now, schematically, if you plot all of the batting averages, for 100 years they've been 260. A quarter of the time that you come up to the plate, you're going to get a hit. For 100 years. But in the early days of baseball, there were people who were terrible players and a few people who were great, and those were the 400 hitters. But as the game matured, everyone got better, and the result of that is the variance got reduced, even though the average was the same. And the variance gets reduced in his mind, Gould's mind, and I'm channeling him here, in part because, well, we don't take dummies into the game anymore, so there aren't any terrible players, and that turns out to be true borne out by the statistics. Remember, that's what this is about, right? And, on the right-hand side of the curve, well, there's a limit of performance. You can't bat better than 100% of the time. So the variance gets, now you know this if you've watched any sport. Because if you've watched any sport like tennis or golf or whatever, at a high level, you know that the worst players on that field and the best are only marginally different. You're not watching someone great versus someone terrible. You're watching a perfectly orchestrated ballet of that sport at its pinnacle of achievement, and everybody's gotten that good. So I thought about that after I read that book, and I said to myself, you know what? That sounds a lot like a lot of the companies that I deal with who come and visit the laboratory. They've grown, they've matured, just like baseball. And as they've grown and as they've matured, their variance has gone down. They don't have any dummies anymore. They don't have any crazies on the right side. They've focused on what they want. Now, what do I mean by variance? Well, I don't know. It might be the books that your employees read. It might be the job descriptions. It might be the corporate culture where you hire people that are more like you. But for whatever reason, the variance seems to go down. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, right? I mean, if you have to get something done, you don't want a lot of variance, okay? If you're the military, you really don't want that kind of variance. You don't even want 400 hitters. You want people focused on their job. But if you want to innovate, then you start to need the crazies. So compare the broad curve of variance in a startup with the narrow curve of expertise that happens as the company gets mature. And I think that's a lot of the reason why companies are not necessarily as innovative as they think they should be. Now, you know, why am I talking about that? And why did I, remember I said this was a pitch? Well, that's why you're here. That's what the Media Lab brings to it. What the Media Lab has done has spent 30 years keeping the variance high. We take dummies like me, we take geniuses like Joe, we take engineers, we take scientists. We have a wide bunch of crazies. When we bring in new people that we hire, we deliberately bring in people that are different from the people that are here before. We don't have to focus on getting something done. We have to focus on that passion and keeping that variance high. So think of the laboratory and think of your couple of days as your chance to take your own variance and have that variance increased through your experiences here. So welcome to the lab's 30th anniversary and enjoy the day.